Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's really important for us to be clear about what happened on January 6th, which was an armed militia who attacked the Capitol in an attempt to overturn the fair and free presidential election. But many on the right continue to downplay what happened on that day. The former president claims it was just, quote, a day of protesting, end quote, and is now actually bragging about the crowd size on that day. One congressional Republican compared it to a, quote, normal tourist visit, end quote. Another went on Fox News to apologize for calling January 6th what it was, a violent terrorist attack. Federal criminal law defines domestic terrorism as, quote, violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature, end quote. Based on that definition, when a mob of armed rioters use force in an attempt to overthrow the United States government, that is domestic terrorism. I'd like to ask both of you, is what happened on January 6th domestic terrorism? Mr. Olsen? Ms. Sanborn?
The Department of Justice and the FBI have been clear that the attacks, the events that occurred on January 6th are being investigated as an act of domestic terrorism. And you quoted from the federal code definition of domestic terrorism, which, if I may, involves acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of criminal law, and in part that are intended to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion. So I think it's entirely appropriate that January 6th events are generally being investigated as acts of domestic terrorism. Having said that, it's important to add that in any particular case, it will depend on the actual facts and circumstances of that case, which of course are now ongoing in the investigation and prosecution stages.
I would consider that in that definition, the term acts is very critical because we're not talking about peaceful protesting. There have to be actual acts, violent acts being committed. Isn't that right, Mr. Olsen?
Absolutely. The focus, and it's important, I appreciate being able to point this out as well, the focus is on acts of violence or other acts that violate the criminal law, not peaceful protests, not assembling, not free speech, not any of the other types of activities that are protected under the Constitution and the First Amendment.
Yeah, I think it's really important to focus on the fact that there have to be actual criminal acts occurring. This is not talking about a bunch of people touring the Capitol or people engaging in peaceful protests. I think that there is a tendency to mix those up, and that is why Ms. Sanborn said that we have to be careful about not interfering with one's First Amendment rights. That is not what was happening to a great extent on January 6th. So now that you've acknowledged, Mr. Olsen, that these were what we were witnessing, domestic tourism on January 6th, I'd like to understand the department's approach to prosecuting the perpetrators. And my understanding is that prosecutors have not been pushing for the sentencing enhancements available for acts of domestic terrorism. Do the actions of January 6th insurrections qualify for terrorism sentencing enhancement? Mr. Olsen.
Senator, the Attorney General last week in a speech here at the Department of Justice talked about the scope and complexity of the January 6th investigation, talking about the more than 700 individuals who've been arrested, more than 325 individuals charged with felonies. Those cases are ongoing and pending. Each case will depend on the specific facts and circumstances of those cases.
Yes,
and whether
excuse me, Mr. Olsen, I am running out of time here. So yes, I understand that it depends on the actual acts that an individual committed. But if that individual committed a crime, such as attacking a police officer, would that person be subject to enhanced sentencing? Could be, right?
It just depends, and it just depends on the facts and circumstances of the case, Senator.
And if it's applicable, would the department pursue enhanced sentencing?
It certainly is true that and as a general matter, the department has pursued enhanced sentencing in terrorism cases over the past several years where it's appropriate.
So as you consider, could I just ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? So as you proceed with all of the trials, and you've already, I think, had settlements with a number of the defendants, then could we see the potential for trials happening where there would be enhanced sentencing pursued by the department?
Again, it certainly is possible depending on the facts of the case.
I think the answer to that is yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Graham.
Thank you. Do you have the resources, the people, and money you need